In the pursuit of economic growth, much has been said and continues to be said about just how vital the private sector is to creating economic prosperity. Economists and analysts also speak of the role of the state, which often features in debates about nationalization of key national mineral resources, such as the mining sector. This discussion presupposes that only two forms of ownership exist: private and public. But what of the cooperative sector, which seeks to be a third way out of what is often a binary debate? More so because it is increasingly showing that a middle road can and should be found, especially since neither the private nor the public sector appear to be able to deal with poverty, inequality and jobs. Joining me now to look at what the sector has to offer is Tepsy Ntseoane. She is the president of the South African Women in Cooperatives. We're also joined by Simel Esim. She's Minister of the Co-operatives Unit at the International Labour Organization. And of course, both ladies join me from our Cape Town studios. Welcome to Political Exchange. Tepsy, let me start with you. We speak a lot about inclusive growth. We speak a lot about shared growth. And we know that women are often outside of growth when we speak about the private sector and, in fact, even state ownership. What is it about cooperatives, Tepsy, that is attractive for women?
Thank you so much, Carmen. I think cooperatives are actually a vehicle to promote inclusive growth. However, in South Africa, we are still behind. When you look at the globe itself, I mean, cooperatives globally are 118 years old. And when you look at our scenario in South Africa, we were formulated around 2004, 2005. And cooperatives in South Africa particularly are formed by individuals or groupings who are, poor, meaning the poor of the poorest. And you can imagine, taking you back to the history of South Africans, people were not educated before, and these people are expected to be included, in the GDP of the country, yet they do not have any knowledge. They do not, knowledge, they might be having indigenous knowledge, but when you talk of education, most of them were not educated at all. Mm-hmm. So these people are trying to group themselves so that they can also be the role players as far as economy is concerned. But due to frustrations, you find that these groups just formulate themselves without even considering if they share, an objective. They just come together, form a cooperative without any specific goal or objective in mind. And that is why in South Africa, you find that most cooperatives formulated by women especially, go under, 2-3 years after registration.
Indeed,
because
Tepsy,
of lack of skills.
Yes, I hear you. Tepsy, I just want to park there quickly. I want to bring Simel into the discussion. We'll return to some of those important points that you've made. Simel, the way in which cooperatives work globally, why is it an attractive third option if one talks about the way in which one can be more egalitarian? The private sector is all about private equity. It's all about those who have money. And of course, the state sector is sometimes often described as quite inefficient, not able to get to the poorest of the poor, serving in many interests, political interests in various countries. What about the cooperative sector makes it accessible, where you have different types of relations that can speak specifically to the issue of equality?
Thank you. Cooperatives, since they've started, have been very much about pooling of resources and know-how among poor people. And they are also a way of economic democracy because it's membership-based. And yes, people want to have their livelihoods, but at the same time, they are members of an economic entity which works like an association where you are concerned about returns to your members within the community, whether you are a financial co-op or an agricultural co-op or an artisanal marketing housing co-op. It's all about returns to your community and your members and doing things together that you couldn't do on your own, alone, whether this is about the know-how, whether this is about the capital, whether it's about getting your voices heard by the local government or the national government or the private sector. And in many cases, yes, we can talk about co-ops as a third way, but in fact, they should be very much about how the private sector and our economies work today, because we saw it with the crisis, the last financial crisis that's still going on today. That the pure economic profit motive model is defunct, is not working. People need an alternative. And the shared values and principles of economic as well as social value, social returns is the way to go. And cooperatives are indeed very much about that. It's just that we need to get this message out to our leaders who are making the decisions about the laws, the policies, the allocations. We need to get this message out to also the private sector, because these agricultural cooperatives do create economies of scale and can help make the value chains more competitive, but at the same time fairer in ensuring that the returns are going to the producers and the smallholders and the people in the local communities that are struggling with limited know-how.
Simel, the question of economies of scale is often an issue when people talk about cooperatives, and I've been looking at your annual report. We find cooperatives a lot in mutuals, in the financial sector, in agricultural sectors, but you don't find it often in, let's say, manufacturing and so on, because there's often this concern that, you know, when one is in business, one is meant to be making profit. How does a cooperative operate with a profit motive, particularly for its members, when it's often presented as a form of ownership that doesn't lend itself to profit making? It's often just seen as breaking even, where people literally live from hand to mouth. It doesn't speak of dividends, so to speak.
Look, financial cooperatives, you're right, and the SACCOs, the Saving and Credit Associations, unions, cooperatives have been flourishing and have had a strong existence in the African continent. And they can actually be very good ways to start investing into other purposes. And yes, and they do. That's agricultural credit supports agricultural producers and their cooperatives. There, I think the policy is not just about co-op. If you want to go into the value-added co-op, you need to go out of this mindset of co-op as a small business that you give small resources and small know-how to. You need to think, we need to think big about cooperatives being integrated into the trade policies of Africa, into the value chains of Africa. And I think there is this disconnect. The co-op is somewhere out there as a small community development function, social function. That's not the case. These are economic associations of the people, of the communities, and they need to be integrated and put into the center of the local economic discussion, into the trade policy, agricultural development policies of our countries and of our regions around the world. And we see that happening in other regions, and I think Africa has great potential for that.
Simel, I'm going to be speaking about other regions, but I want to bring Tepsy back into the discussion, particularly to revisit some of the points she made in the initial conversation about the track record and some of the pitfalls of cooperative movements in South Africa. Tepsy, take us through, you know, what are the common mistakes that people make in cooperatives, and how does an organization such as yours come in and strengthen, you know, things like governance of cooperatives, getting the associations on a sure footing, getting assistance, so that they are able to function as alternative ways in which economic growth and prosperity can be generated, whether it's on the small or on the much larger scale that Simel has been speaking about?
First of all, Carmen, I must say that I'm very excited that this event is being hosted by South Africa, which, you know, gives us an opportunity, you know, to take stock. You know, it is an eye-opener for us as South Africans. As I have alluded earlier on that, you know, cooperatives are still new in us as South Africans, especially after democracy. One key thing that I would want to highlight is the question of a business plan. As I have said earlier, that cooperatives are started by people who are not educated. Now, when you talk business plan to those people, it is Greek to them. And also, business plan is important to every business. A cooperative should be taught how to write up their own business plans so that they can have a compass that would direct them, you know, where they should go. They must have a vision for their cooperative. They must have an objective, you know, and, you know, with time frames. They must know their products. What product am I going to give or provide to the communities? You know, we need to have a think tank, actually, as South Africans for cooperatives, whereby people could go there and where the research is done as to what is it, where is the gap in the market. Cooperatives themselves should be able to identify where the gap is in terms of service, in terms of
Yeah, Tepsy, I wanted to come in here talking about the question of support. What kind of support are you getting from the South African government? Because cooperatives have been identified as part of the industrial policy action plans, IPAPs, as ways in which to get larger sectors of people into the economy, particularly young people, and of course women who are often the bulk of the unemployed. What kind of assistance are you getting, particularly if one focuses the gathering that both of you have been attending? You know, what is the kind of plans that are coming out, particularly from the side of the South African government, that gives you hope that cooperatives are going to be a form of ownership that will in fact be encouraged and will be capacitated?
Carmen, I think South Africa has got you know, beautiful and effective strategies in place. The problem is, you know, those strategies do not talk to us. First of all, DTI has a strategy for cooperatives, which is called, you know, it's a grant actually, CIS, grant for cooperatives. Now, what happened before, they would give that grant to a cooperative. Now I'm talking a cooperative without skills. So now you can imagine, you know, if government gives me 300,000 rand, the first thing that would cross my mind, because I am not educated, I do not have skills, is to look at my kitchen where I don't have fridge, I don't have this, you know, so many things come into mind. Now, I am so excited that government actually, through organizations like Sanako and Sawiko and others, realize that they cannot, you know, give money as in rents. What they did is you write a list of things that your organization need, and they pay for those services, then you get services. I think that's a milestone, you know, to us as cooperatives. Okay. But coming back, Carmen, I think, you know, incubation, you know, if we can have methodologies like people need to be incubated so that they can be afforded skills to be able to run their cooperatives in a meaningful way that would, could also contribute to economy. The question of technology, we lack technological skills, and we don't have technology in South Africa. And we're saying to the globe, transfer those skills, those technological skills. We need them. And also, there's a host of things.
Okay, of course, we're discussing the cooperative sector with guest Tepsy Ntseoane making the point about cooperatives having to get the proper support and the right support. And of course, the other guest, Simel Esim, speaking there about the importance of getting cooperatives on the center stage of government policy and not just seeing it as an add-on. Esim, rather, Simel, let me bring you in here. The African experience with regard to cooperatives is both encouraging in some instances, but also quite patchy in others. If one looks at the global picture, where in the world is cooperatives working, the sector working in terms of getting greater economic democracy off the ground, where you have inclusive and shared growth? And what is that best practice that can be incorporated into the strategies of African governments to make the sector viable and worth pursuing on the African continent?
Thank you for that, Karima. Yes, indeed. I will pick up from where Tepsy has left off, in fact. Funds alone are not enough. When you are giving grants for cooperative development, it needs to be very well connected to the business plans, to innovation, and to services that are needed, the legal services, the advisory services, co-op management. How do you manage a co-op? It's a great idea of economic democracy, but how do you make it work? How do you get your members to actively participate, to vote, to remind them of the need for returns to community? So co-op education is very critical in the sense, such as in places like further education centers, and in places where cooperatives really are integral to the culture and the texture of the society. You see that cooperative education, cooperative way of working, starting from very early on in the education system. We talk about entrepreneurship and women entrepreneurship around the African continent, but around the world. But thinking of doing this in a collective way and putting the legal support systems, the policies, the finances, but also with the non-financial services that are needed for the education, know-how. Tepsy has mentioned technology, appropriate technologies. There's a lot of innovation when people come together, collectively think together. There is a lot of innovation that can come from that, social innovation. I'm not just talking technological innovation. Right. And also there are barriers that need to be overcome. For instance, gender roles. You know, we have agricultural cooperatives where you have very little women membership because of land ownership or the traditional roles ascribed to house leadership, the head of household being considered a man. How do we utilize these collective institutions for those things? And we see many good experiences as such from around the world. For instance, Quebec in Canada is a cooperative heaven. From the point you get off the airport, everything is a co-op. The bank is a co-op. The taxi company is a co-op. Waste management is through cooperatives. You have in the US migrant domestic workers organizing in cooperatives for employment intermediation, for negotiating better contracts. Even in the informal economy, street vendors of South Africa, they organize. Why not organizing cooperatives where you can have multi-purpose functions? Yeah. Social services. Japan is great, and we've seen them, how the Japanese cooperatives stepped in when there was a crisis and disaster. The Japanese cooperatives were the ones in the forefront in rebuilding their communities because they have these multi-purpose, multi-stakeholder
Simel, just hold that thought.
In the sense that
Simel, just hold that thought there. I want to bring Tepsy in here. The question of being able to access resources is of course important, but we know that resources are not just financial. But if we were to talk about financial resources and capacitation, in your experience, Tepsy, in the South African context, is the financial sector coming to the party with cooperatives, or do you still have to rely mostly on the development finance institutions that are semi-state run?
I think what is key here is a business plan. Like I said before, they normally say if you have a bankable business plan, you will be able to access funding. So I think if cooperatives can be grouped together and be given, training on how to write up your business plan and write up those business plan, a bankable business plan, I'm sure they will be able to receive finance. However, our government has agencies that also provide financing to cooperatives. It is not only banks, but yes, banks are also, coming on board. I will speak about rural development, for instance. I'm a farmer myself, and I know what is going on into, in an agricultural sector. Rural development has a strategy. They call it comprehensive rural development strategies, whereby they give women farms, and those farms they also come with financing. They also come with technical skills, whereby now the Department of Agriculture come in with skills. So there is a lot support out there that one can access, through our governments without even going to the financial sectors. However, financial sectors, they come on board when they see that at least this farm is farmable, there is
and
production.
There's a commercial value proposition. Yes. Simel, I wanted to ask specifically the kind of demands that is being made on the private sector regarding this. We know that the state is always being lobbied to give assistance and support to cooperatives, and there's a governance imperative for that. What is the value proposition for the private sector to get on board with cooperatives? What is the financial reward that underpins forward-looking businessmen and women, venture capitalists and others, from putting money and resources into cooperatives?
It is very much about starting your cooperative in a collective manner. Instead of the investor-owned, shareholder-owned model, you are going with a membership-based model. So you are making surplus, but the way you are thinking about the surplus is not as full-fledged profit. You return back to the business. So you return back to the community with your also social benefits. I think all young people now, yes, even when they are looking for a job, they are very much concerned about the environment, about what's happening in their communities, about the poverty around. They want to do something about this, but it should not necessarily be something as a charity that they invest, that they give some money to, or they volunteer in. Yes, of course, those are very important, but they can do this and fulfill these aspirations within their own business if they were to set up their business model as a cooperative, put their money and know-how collectively, and think of this governance structure where you are democratically deciding, but also thinking of the returns, part of the returns to the community. And what we saw with financial crisis, again, I go back to that, is we saw the cooperative banks not going bankrupt, not going down under, because they were connected to the community, they were connected to their members. Their members did not let them take unnecessary risk. So that connection to the real economy is actually a good business practice. Right. That is important in today's world, where there is higher and higher risk with multiple crises, whether it's food security or energy or environment, and all the
Simel, I'm very
attracted
to I'm very attracted to what you're saying about a connection to the real economy, so that we move away from what a lot of critics call, over financialization of economies, where there's speculation, where you have, active involvement and investment in the productive sectors of the economy. Does cooperatives provide, would you say, an alternative way of engaging in a global economic system that is increasingly becoming, financialized and also completely, susceptible to incredible risk that is often taken at the expense of ordinary men and women?
Yes, indeed. We are here today for the meeting of the International Cooperative Alliance, which is all the cooperative members, countries of the world coming together. 1 billion members, over 100 million workers. This is a community. It is a business community. It is a socially responsible business community. And that social responsibility is not just being imposed on it as PR or as gimmicks. It is inherent to its nature to its model. Tepsy and I just came from a session where all the financial cooperatives were talking about how do we make sure our resources as cooperatives, cooperative banks go into building the cooperative movement globally. Yes. And the participants, cooperators from around South Africa, were saying, yes, this is the time. We want to be a part of this movement. So your question, Karima, is right on. We are there, I think. And
indeed,
it's just that awareness.
Yes, very powerful words.
In these programs like yours and in the education system, we really need to get the message out. I think people, this is not bogus, this is real, this is happening, and millions and hundreds of millions are benefiting from it. It is time that South Africa does, and Africa.
Indeed. Ladies, that is where we will have to leave it. Unfortunately, of course, still much more that we can talk to the issue of cooperatives. Thanks to our guest, Tepsy Ntseoane, President of the South African Women in Cooperatives, and of course, Simel Esim, Minister of the Co-operatives Unit at the International Labour Organization.